Have you ever wondered where forests come from and how they grow? This book is about a hardwood forest in Massachusetts. It could be about a forest anywhere because most forests grow the same way. To find out how this Massachusetts forest grew, we must go back in time. We must see how the forest land looked 200 years ago. 200 years ago, the land was open and green. But when the farmer and his family who owned the land and who had cleared it moved away, changes began. The wind blew seeds across the fields. Birds dropped seeds from the air. The sun warmed the seeds. The rain watered them, and they grew. Next page. In a few years, the land was filled with weeds, with dandelions and goldenrod and chickweed, and milkweed with its pods of fluff, and ragweed and black-eyed Susans. Each spring, new plants took root. The land began to look different. Burdock and briars grew among the weeds, making the land moist and brushy. Wait, back. Blackberries grew. Birds came to eat them. Song sparrows, bobolinks, and catbirds. Okay, next. Meadow mice and cottontail rabbits made their nests in the tall grass. Woodchucks, moles, and shrews dug their tunnels in the ground. Snakes came to feed on the small animals. Hawks and owls hunted over the land for their food. Time passed. Next. And then one summer, 5 years after the farm family left, a tree seedling sprouted. It wasn't a cedar or a birch seedling or a poplar or an aspen seedling. Oh, it could have been, because these trees like full sunlight. It was a white pine seedling, another sun-loving tree. The wind had blown its seed from a nearby forest, and the seed sprouted. That same summer, more white pine seedlings, more white pine seedlings sprouted. The land was speckled with tiny dots of green. Year after year, through weeds and low brush, the little trees pushed their way up. Tree scientists call the first trees that take hold on a piece of land pioneer trees. That is what these little white pines were. No other sun-loving tree grows in such numbers or so fast. As the pine trees grew, brush-dwelling birds moved onto the land. They replaced the field dwellers. Towhees, warblers, and field sparrows made their homes in the thickets. Next. Oh, I missed the weasels and the foxes. Well, that's all right. The weasels and foxes and, oh, there's a bunch of guys who caught mice and rabbits and birds for their dinner. Okay, 20 years, let's see. 20 years after the first pine seedling sprouted, the land was covered with white pines. Their branches blocked the sun rays. The old weeds and grasses died from want of light. But what the pines did to the old weeds, they also did to their own kind. When new white pine seedlings tried to grow, they couldn't get sunlight and they died. Next. Only those seedlings that liked the shade grew beneath the stands of white pines. Ash, red oak, red maple, and tulip trees. These were the trees that the white pines helped the most. In less than 15 years, the new trees were crowding the white pines for space. A struggle had begun. Only the strongest trees would survive. Scientists call this change from one kind of tree or animal to a new kind succession. They say that one kind of tree or animal succeeds another. As the new trees on the land began to succeed the old pines, the animal life on the land changed too. The meadow mice moved because their food supply was gone, and there was no more grass for them to build their nests. White-footed mice took their place. They made their nests in hollow stumps and logs, and they ate seeds from the trees and shrubs. For the first time, deer came to live on the land. Now there were places for them to hide and tender shoots for them to eat. Cardinals perched in the trees. So did redstarts, ovenbirds, and ruffed grouse. Squirrels and chipmunks brought nuts onto the land and planted them. Some of these sprouted with the other seedlings, and I used to go to Camp Akanikan and gather acorns and take them home, and my squirrels planted them in my ivy. I think we're in the way Camp Akanikan is at this point in the story. Next. 40 years had passed since the farmer and his family had left. And then one summer afternoon, 50 years after the farm family had gone, a storm broke over the land. Lightning struck the tallest pines, killing some of them and damaging others. Strong winds uprooted more pines, and lightning fires scorched the branches. But this is how forests grow. The death of some of the pine trees made room for new and different trees that had been sprouting on the forest floor. As time passed, insects and disease hurt the other pines. Every time one of them died, a red oak, white ash, or red maple tree took its place. The forest grew. By the year 1860, more than 80 years after the farm family had left, the weeds were all gone. The pioneer white pines were nearly all gone. Red oaks, red maples, and ash trees were everywhere. The forest had reached its middle stage, like Camp Akanikan. Now on the forest floor came the last of the new seedlings. These were beeches and the sugar maples, trees that like deep shade. The other seedlings, the red oak, red maple, and ash seedlings, needed more light, and some of them needed more water and different kinds of soil to grow in. So they died, and the beech and the sugar maple seedlings took their place. Every autumn, the trees lost their leaves. They fell to the ground with dead twigs and branches. All of these things decayed and made a rich layer of stuff called humus. Then, slowly, bacteria, worms, and fungi turned the humus into soil from which the trees got food and water. Sometimes an animal or an insect died and its body became part of the humus too. 100 years had passed since the farm family had moved. Now, whenever a red oak, red maple, or white ash tree died, it made room for the smaller beech trees and sugar maples. These formed a layer below the older trees called an understory. Every winter, snow blanketed the forest floor. Every spring, the ground was covered with wildflowers. Year after year, the beeches and sugar maples pushed their branches toward the sky. Hemlocks grew in their shade. Slowly, one by one, most of the red oak, Red maple and ash trees disappeared. By the year 1927, which was 150 years after the forest had begun, the beeches and sugar maples were the kings of the forest. Today, a family owns the land and they love the peaceful forest. They build their house on the same spot where the farm family once built theirs. But they do not clear the land this time. Instead, they listen and look. What was once open fields is now a magnificent forest.
Stop
It
cutting.
is for many wild animals. What?
Everybody else, please mute, aside from her.
Next.
Hang on, Rita, you're muted. Sorry, my mistake.
For foxes, bobcats, wood turtles, chipmunks, bears, deer, squirrels, mice, porcupines, and many other creatures. Its tree roots hold water and keep the soil from washing away. Birds of many kinds nest in its branches. Its humus enriches the earth's soil. All through the world, other forests are growing like the one in Massachusetts. The kinds of trees in each forest may be different, but the way they grow is very much the same. Nothing in a forest ever stands still. Old trees are dying and making room for new trees every day. The next time you go into a forest, think how long it took to grow. Try and learn the names of the different trees. Most forests have 3 stages of growth: the pioneer stage, the middle stage, and the final or climax stage. See if you can tell which stage the growth of the forest is in. A full-grown forest has 5 layers: the canopy, the understory, the shrub layer, the herbal layer, and the forest floor layer. Can you find all 5? I think it takes a very old forest to have all those. If you find a tree stump and count its growth rings, you will know the tree's age. Fungi live on rotting trees and plants. Look for them on fallen logs and stumps. Can you find signs of insects that have hurt trees? Can you find signs of woodpeckers? Know the different signs of animal life in a forest: tracks, scat, feathers, fur, or snake skins, nests, burrows, dens, bones, and skeletons. Do you know the poisonous plants in a forest? Poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac. And the book ends with this part here: some rules of the forest. Never light fires in a forest without adult supervision. Never go into a forest alone, or at least without telling someone where you're going. Never eat any of the wild plants, berries, or mushrooms without knowing first if they're safe to eat. Never pull the bark off a tree. The bare spot may bring disease and insects. And never girdle a tree, which is taking the bark off a complete circle around the tree, because that would kill it. Remember, trees are living things. Treat them as such. This book could be about any forest, because most forests grow the same way. Once the land was open and green, and then changes began.
Thank you, Rita.
Yeah, I love that book.